Hi, I'm Pooja Deng. I'm a women's leadership and executive coach. And today I'd like to talk about a topic that I've been asked about pretty often. And that is, if you cry at work, is it a total deal breaker? Now, this is kind of tricky, right? As you could expect, because often women get called out for being too emotional, right? Or we're trying really hard to not be too emotional and sort of be more like a man or kind of gather our thoughts. The truth is, like, everyone expresses emotions differently, right? And this is true for men and women. I know men that have cried at work as well, and I know several women that would never ever break down crying. Like, if they just not express their frustration or anger in that way. The tricky thing with crying, though, and why people think it's a deal breaker, is because it's perceived as and thought of as a sign of weakness. But in my experience, crying is less a sign of weakness and much more a sign of frustration in the moment. Because basically you could have been working long hours on something, super vested on something, you care so much, and there is something that is frustrating you or a roadblock. And that's when people tend to kind of lose it, if you will, and they start crying. Now, the important thing is, if that does happen in the workplace, sort of excuse yourself to go and sort of gather yourself. Definitely don't over apologize for anything. It's a very natural human thing. And often crying and expressing our emotions isn't always within our control, right? I know for me as well, when there've been moments where I've wanted to cry, it sort of just catches me off guard and comes up for me. It's not like I sit there and I'm like actively thinking, I'm going to now start crying. It's sort of a tough one. And therefore, for some people, it comes up in them more often than others. Now, I will say, if you find yourself crying very often, that is a signal of a bigger problem, right? Where really you may just not be the right fit in the particular org. There may be someone that you're working with that's just driving you nuts, that you're having a really hard time communicating with, right? Or getting across. Basically, is an underlying issue that you may need to approach or look through. Like, maybe you bring in a third party to try to figure out how to work together. Crying should not be viewed as a deal breaker at work, but much more a signal of, hey, we're human, and a sign of frustration in the situation. So if you step away, gather yourself, then you can come back and jump right back into. If you are able to then communicate just how much you care about the situation at hand and why it caught you off guard, then people are able to move on. The other important thing I'd like to point out when it comes to crying at work is that if you are someone with whom someone else starts to cry, how you handle it is really important. Don't get super awkward. Don't get uncomfortable enough and excuse yourself. Be there and present with the moment, unless with the person, unless they want you to leave. Understand that they are probably really frustrated, have maybe been looking at the issue or staring at this for days on end or hours or whatever. So if you sort of lean in, give them a moment, allow them to take a deep breath, allow for that silence, that will go a really long way in making the other person feel comfortable, and in you creating sort of the culture in your company where expressing emotions, because everyone cares so much about what they're working with, is a healthy and normal part of life versus something to have to apologize for or a career ending thing, right? And I just want us to realize that there are factors coming into place, but if it's happening super often, then it might be an underlying issue that you need to address. I hope that that was helpful. Until next time.